In December of 2015, near the end of my walk from Stockholm to Sydney, I found myself on the Gold Coast with some spare time on my hands and an invitation to spend Christmas in Sydney. In a moment of inspiration, I sent an email to Bruce at Kickbike Australia and asked if he possibly had a kickbike that I could borrow. And he did, which is how I found myself astride a sports G4 model kickbike on a 1,000-kilometre journey to Sydney. It needs to be said right here at the beginning that my preparations were very hurried, and given more time, I would have liked to have outfitted the kickbike with better touring gear. But I only had one day to spare and had to use whatever I could find at the local bike shops. After a bit of searching, I found a front rack that I was able to jewellery rig onto the G4, and at another shop, I found some pannier bags. Along with the dry sack I already had, I was ready. Kickbiking is both quicker and easier than walking, which had been my main method of travel for the last few years, but slower than bicycle touring. It's a nice compromise, slow enough to enjoy the scenery, yet quick enough to enable to cover respectable distances in the course of a day. It's also very easy to stop, step off and immerse yourself in the surroundings in a much more immediate way than when you're sitting on a bicycle. The differences are subtle, but they are there, and I found myself slowing down and not having the resistance to stopping that I often feel when riding a bike. It helps that the north coast of New South Wales is one of the most scenic in the world, and there are endless beautiful beaches and headlands to admire. It eventually took me 17 days to get to Sydney, with 14 days of kicking and 3 rest days. I didn't stay on the highways, but tried to find smaller roads and tracks to follow, even kickbiking along the beach at some stages. It was great. Rolling along the beach with the waves almost washing up to the tyres and miles of emptiness ahead of me. Make sure you get your timing right though. South of Yamba, I found myself on the beach at high tide and ended up having to almost carry the kickbike through the soft sand. Hard work and nowhere near as enjoyable as kicking along the hard sand at low tide. I even got to test the off-road capabilities as well. With the help of Google Maps, I found a number of small tracks through state forests and national parks. Tracks so small that calling them tracks is misleading. The G4 sports model I was on is not really intended for off-road use, but it coped with it without any problems, and I managed to make my way along some rough single track that would have been impassable even for a four-wheel drive. After 17 days and close to 1,000 kilometers touring on a kickbike, I was pleasantly surprised at how competent a tourer it is. There are a small number of drawbacks, like not being able to carry as much gear as a fully set-up touring bike, and the fact that it's slower than a bicycle, but both of those can also be seen as positives. Being limited in carrying capacity forces you to really consider what you need to take with you, and the slower speed immerses you much more in the surroundings. Physically, I had no problems at all. It's very nice not to have to endure the sore backside that bicycle touring always gives me for the first week or so, and I suffered only mild muscle pain despite having 2 days where I covered more than 100 kilometers. And yeah, I arrived in time for Christmas.